microphone. There you go. Let's make sure it's not overdriving too much. Time to catch up with a couple of other developments for version 9. PD Pro 9 is still under development as I'm recording this. It is now late July. We still expect it sometimes in September. And there are a couple of things that have been added since last time I recorded this. So let's see, the neutrons filter we just saw a little bit. There's some preview there, and basically particles that are attracting each other, sort of a gravity field setting, and you can enable the trails. You can also enable the length of the trails. So all sorts of different fun stuff to do with this, to create some fancy animations. You can also enable the nova or the lens flares, or both of these. Let me cancel this quick and create an animation placeholder. Let's say 123 frames, so that's roughly 4 seconds. And let's go back to the filters, animated, and neutrons. And so what I'll do is I'll just render that with the, not with the lens flares, but with the nova. And you may want to check what the nova settings are. You can do that right here. Oh no, you have to do that before you go into the plugin, so into the filter. So let's go here under nova options, and you can see large bloom, star of 16s, and so on. So if you want to test that first, you can perhaps erase to black and select a color such as light green, and then do your stars with that, right? So here are some of the stars you can do, just 2 sides to it, or 4 or 6. Would be nice to have 5, I suppose. And then there's also the size of the bloom, a large bloom or a small bloom, and you get more focus on those branches coming out on those stars. Anyway, so that's something that you can also enable on the neutrons. And so what we'll do is we'll go back to animated neutrons, and now you don't see it in the preview because it is a bit time consuming, but you'll see it during the actual animation render. So let's go and render that. These are tiny little ones. It depends on the size of the particle, but you see it's also combining that with the trail. Now we might want to have more of those, or a longer animation. It was kind of short-lived here, so let's go and perhaps make the animation a little bit longer. Let's make it 222 frames, and then on top of that perhaps we'll make it a little bit, no, we can keep the size as is, and go back to filter, animated neutrons. And so this time we'll even give it more of them, so that the gravity gets to be stronger and they start flying even faster. So there you go, because the whole thing is really a simulation of gravitational forces pulling all these together. They are initially in random locations, and they come together like this. So maybe at this point you want to simulate something like the Big Bang, all these parts representing galaxies coming together. I know I'm totally refuting the way things really happened billions of years ago, but let's say here we have enough that this causes a big explosion. So we have another lens flare or another big nova coming in here. We might want to actually animate that. So let's go to the lens flares, and we might want to add a big bang here. Now this needs to be animated, and right now I'm actually at the filter level, so that's not how we're going to do it. Instead, let's undo that with Control Z or U for undo, and then use animate. Excuse me, not here. Timeline right here in the timeline. We have the filters collection for the timeline. Let me move this over to the side with Control Shift, and then go down to the animated category. The filters for lens flares is down here, and we can preview, see the flare settings. This one that we had chosen earlier is still good. Let's go and actually place it right here in the middle, and at the beginning of the animation it's not there, right? We're not going to have it, so we reduce the level to 0, and we keep it all the way till about here at level 0. Set a keyframe right there. And then we go here, we start heating up, right, something like so, and then suddenly right around here we have a big massive explosion, right, and then we have a little bit after that it kind of comes back down. Oops, no, not changing position, but we do have kind of a whiplash we want to do. So we go up here, and gradually slow down a little bit on the intensity, fade it off, something like so. And then suddenly here we have another whiplash, we have another big double bang. There you go. And that one shortly after that will be back down. And now here we're going to gradually fade away. And maybe there's a little bit of a glow remaining towards the end here, just like that. Okay, let's go render that. And again, keep this save undo checked in case you're not sure if the result is useful or good. So you can preview it and then undo it. Each of the frames that are being rendered, before they get rendered, we actually save them into a temp folder, and so now we have a playback of this situation right there. And perhaps we need to have this play a little bit faster, so we could go to FPS here, frames per second, make that 50 per second. That would be kind of more of a big bang or double whiplash. There you go. 60 frames a second. And of course, if eventually we'll play it at 30 frames a second, but we do want it faster, that's where we need to do a little bit of frame blending. So perhaps we'll go here and say it's time to do some time stretch, and get it with frame blending half the time. Instead of 30 frames, we'll go down to 60, or rather 60 down to 30, but showing half the frames. So this will bring it down to a faster pace, still playing at 30 frames a second. So here we go. Okay, so that's one thing that's relatively new, the development of the neutrons filter. And there is another animated filter that has something similar to it, which is the animated starry night. Right now, so one thing that's new with this one is that the preview is animated here and gives you a nice live preview, and you can even force it to full screen view. So that's awesome, because you can really see what it's going to look like in your final image. And it is animated, so here too you can add some atmospherics. You can add again preview it in that mode. And this is perfect timing for the Perseids meteor shower coming up. If you want to have the stars a little bit bigger, those would be meteors or fireballs, many of them, right? This is more of a diving into the stars. So let's see, without atmosphere, but maybe we can add a little bit of glow and reduce the softness or increase that. So all sorts of different parameters to play with. And let's preview that in full screen. So tons of fun stuff to be had here with different settings. The vectors too, you can say in which direction should they move, so you can have them go sideways. You can say, no, I don't want this animated. You can have the speed change a little bit here. Let's increase it. Vector bank, that's kind of a rotational component, so it kind of twirls around as you go, maybe not too fast. Star size, let's reduce them to small again. Star count, let's have more of them, and preview that in full screen. Okay, so lots of different ways to use that, and let's go render that. So it renders that now over the original animation. The original animation will be gone. I didn't care to save it, but we can now see this one. And we can do, of course, all sorts of other things with that. For instance, go back to the timeline, and in the animated collection of the timeline we can go to ghosting, and so that will introduce some additional trails to the whole animation too. Let's do a little trail effect here with 6 or so levels, and so that will make it kind of a blurry motion trails effect. If it is perfectly circular, you can do that in another way, which is with the motion motion blur. And so let's see if we have that one in the animated collection of the timeline, and that would be under blur. Where is it here? Photographic blur. There you go. So we don't have that one here, but I think we may have it, or maybe that's not the case. Let's see, filter, blur, and there's the radial blur, and yep, but we don't animate that one quite yet, so that may be for the to-do list. But there is a capability here too, which is sort of a rotational blur, a radial blur, which could be also useful for for some of that ghosting effect. It's not quite the same really though, because it goes the same way ahead and behind the positions, so not quite the same. But anyway, so that's one of the newer filters, or rather revived filters. The Starry Night has been around for a little while in earlier versions already, but now we are doing more work on the previews, on the live preview and the full screen preview here. So let's see if we can get this to something that looks a little bit like shooting stars. The Perseids meteor storm coming here. Let's go really no softness, a little bit of glow. Let's do a lot of them. And we don't want rotation, so no vector bank. It's going the wrong way. Let's reset. There you go. So now, there you go. So now we have this rotating down a little bit, or moving down, and a little bit to the right. Let's say we have the quadrant, the radiant up here in the upper left corner. There you go. Now let's go with something like this, and perhaps not quite that much glow. Star size. Okay, let's do a full screen preview. Yeah, they'll be moving fast. Alright, so let's go animate and go. So it's now overriding the original animation, the previous animation that is, and here we go. Now again, here we do have just the stars without any trails, and I don't want to promise that we might have trails in the final release, who knows, but how do we add them? Well, we can certainly do a ghosting here, and perhaps give it all the way to 16 levels. Let's give it, where's a ghost? Right there. And give it something like 16 levels, so that's the maximum at this time, and let's go apply that. And we do have some Skype activity here we may need to stop. Alright, this rendering is done. Let's see what we've got here. Yeah, a little bit of trails now. Short meteor storm. And you know, we could certainly continue that with more renderings. Let's go try that one more time. Render animated Starry Night. Same parameters as we had before. Perhaps let's do more of them. So star size, perhaps even a little bit brighter, bigger. Star count still at the max. Softness, let's keep it very low, maybe a little bit up there, and quick preview. There you go. Okay. Now ideally we would render that on top of the existing image rather than replacing the image. So that's a feature perhaps to be considered, or a technique to be used is to merge, to blend two sequences together. Right, so you create one on a black background and then merge it or blend it in additive mode into another sequence. And you know, you can do that under a couple of places. You can combine or composite actually different image sequences. So here's a compose with swap. The swap itself can be an animated sequence, and then so you could basically combine in an additive mode. But the swap would need to be not just a single swap image from the swap buffer, but instead would be the same sequence of a prior rendering. Right, so let's go do that to finalize that. So first of all, we'll go to the animated filter here, Starry Night, without the atmosphere, because the atmosphere will be added at the very last so that we have better control. Everything is on black background right now. Let's go preview that. That's good. Let's go OK that. So let's do this one rendering of 112 frames. It goes from 0 to 111. Alright, and then let's go save that. So animation, save as a DWA, dog waffle animation. And let's see, where do we want to render that? Let's save it where it's going to be needed in the very end. Always too many choices here. Where's my computer? Oh, there it is, D drive. D drive, daily dose, version 9, and let's create a new folder, and this will be, what shall I call it? What's the name of this? It's the Starry Night. Okay, so let's go right here, nouveau dossier, Starry Night. Okay, go right in there, Starry Night, and save it. And this is one animation. So one flight into the stars. Right, one flight into the stars.dwa. It will record this as a dog waffle animation. And now I'm going to do another one. So this one's done. Let's go render another one. Animated, and Starry Night, there it is, and do basically another one, perhaps this time with even larger stars, brighter, more glow, more softness, tons of different options we could explore here. Less softness, more crisp. There, let's go render that. And as soon as that's done, we can go and save that one. So we now have a second one there. Save that to one flight into the stars, or second flight into the stars. There you go. And so now we have two sequences, right? So one of them we will load as the swap buffer that's animated. And so question is, where do we do that? How do we select one of those two animations as the swap buffer? Make it an animated swap. This is done here perhaps under animation, and sure enough, animated swap image. Right? So right there we can go and select one of those DWA files. It's looking for DWA. I'm going to say, let's load the first one into that swap buffer. So we attach this one, the first one, to the swap buffer, which means if we, for instance, erase this one, right, it's black, or if we even erase it to a different color, like so, that's in the main buffer. But if we, and you see this right here in the window decoration at the top here, it shows main, and it has an animated swap. As a reminder here in parentheses, it shows that we have loaded an animated swap. What we can also do is go look at that image, the first frame of the animated swap, any one of them actually. So right now here I'm looking at the first image. Actually I did erase this, so let's stay on this one. You can always undo that. In fact, let's do that right now, undo, and I'm going to go to the first frame. And on the first frame I want to erase it, so we know we are looking at the main buffer, the main image, and now I'm switching over to the swap buffer. That's the second image. It's almost like a second layer, a second image, like the back side of your canvas. You're drawing mostly on the main buffer. That's the front side of your paint canvas, and now you flip it around. You say, oh look, there's another white surface of tarp. You can paint on that as well. Well, you can animate in this case, and you can jump to that swap buffer. That's what you do here. It's jump to the swap image, and there it is. That's the image coming from the animated swap buffer we have loaded from the file. How do we know? Well, let's go and switch back to the other one, and you can see that it's got a different star layout, right? So you can jump between the two, and you can be on the main buffer, on the swap buffer, and it's going to be, in fact you can do that right there, and you can see that right now it shows I'm on the main buffer, and if I switch here I'm now on the swap buffer, and so between the two it's evidently showing that we have different image sequences there, because we rendered those into the first one or the second one. So the first one is in the swap buffer, the second one is in the main buffer, and so we can go and animate through this, but we can also composite the two together. We can combine the two together. You can, for instance, see them both at the same time simply by clicking here. Now that's going to be a multiply filter, or a blending that's multiply mode, which means it's probably going to blend itself out except for the places where stars happen to be overlapping, which is going to be very rare. But what you want to do is right click here and change the layer mode. Instead of the default, which is multiply, you want that to be additive. Now you have them both combined. Now you have them both combining into the preview here, and so You can look at just one, or you can look at both at the same time in additive mode. So essentially you want to blend the two together, not just on this one frame though, on the entire sequence is where we want to make that happen. So you could potentially you could do that here. That's only on a single frame though, composite them or combine with swap. That's only on one. What you really want to do is do that at the level of the entire frame sequence throughout the animation. Frame for frame, the one from the main buffer and the one from the swap buffer should be combined. This one, same thing. So, oops, that was the wrong key here on my keyboard. There you go. Right, so this one, this one, this one. Each of these have their counterpart between main and the swap buffer. And what you want to do is combine those together. Easy enough. You go to the timeline and you say combine. Find the group of filters that are the combine with swap. There you go. And what you want to do is mix the buffers one way or another and give perhaps prevalence to one or the other. You see how you can change it so it's giving you a preference over one or the other buffer. That's not quite what we want here. What we want really is to add them together. So you add, now what's black, you add black to that, it remains black, right? So that's a no, the dark parts will remain dark, but when you have a star from one image, you will add over the dark from the other image and it will start showing both stars at the same time. So that's perfect. That's what we want. Additive mode. You could also do others like divide, screen. Screen might be useful too. You know, give it a little bit of try a little bit of the luminance, complement. Some of them will give you additional effects. Now, when it's mostly black and white, it's not quite that impressive. Binary. Interesting effects there too, especially if you're into astronomy. You know, you want to look for black dots on white background. It's easier to recognize them than the other way around. You can do an AND, that's like a multiply almost, and then the OR will be very similar to the additive mode. So a couple of ways to get this done. Let's stay with the simple one, the additive mode, and apply that. Again, you can have the save undo here in case you end up not liking the result. But most likely what we have here now is a much denser field of stars, and we can fly into that all the same. Now, how do you turn this into a looping animation that goes endlessly so you don't see the end of it and you kind of constantly have these stars coming to you? One thing you can do is say about half of the images are not needed. The last half is going to blend over the first half. Or maybe not quite that many, maybe only 30% of them, right? So you dedicate the last 30% of these frames, you know, like from frame 80 to 111, those frames, you could say I'm going to cut them away, but I'm going to actually blend them in gradually at the beginning. How do we do that? Well, very easily with the right click on the timeline, you can choose make loopable. Right? With make loopable, you will actually do exactly that. You will say how many frames you want to cut off at the end for the benefit of making them blend in at the beginning. I'm not going to do that right now because before I do that, I also want to introduce that the motion blur, or rather the ghosting. So I'm going to go to the timeline and find my animated group at the bottom with the ghosting. Give it a lot of ghosting, maybe not as much as 16, maybe 11 or 12. Apply that. And you notice that I'm doing all this without even doing any sort of saves in between, and that's not a good habit. We really should be taking this one step at a time and saving in between, because you might make a mistake and then you have to undo or redo things. It's better to take the time to save every once in a time. But now we have this set of trails, and we could now even run another set, perhaps a little bit less of that, but run some more, right? So you can do some additional ghosting on top of that, perhaps add a different number, because you can see that it's got a little bit of a distance. Some of the fast moving stars are showing down here in the lower left corner. These are showing that well, it's an approximation. You can see them dot for dot as they move frame for frame. Now when they're close enough, it looks great, but when they are moving too fast, these are dots you can see. And so it's a little bit easier to see it in a continuous mode if you then render it one more time at a slightly different pace. right? Different distance, or maybe a few more. The problem, though, what happens too is gradually these trails will become darker and darker, because every time you blend them, you blend a relatively mid-gray tone to a dark tone next to it on the frame-by-frame collection, and so eventually it might look like it's getting too dark. So what you could do is renormalize the image. You could say, okay, let's bring it back up to a brighter level. You can adjust the brightness, you can adjust the the gamma. There's a couple of different things you could do to adjust that. One way to do it really quickly is go to the image menu and say expand dynamic range, and that will show on the frame, and then you can say yes, let's go apply that to the entire sequence. That's one way to do it. Another way might be perhaps to work with the value. So you go to the filter, the timeline sets here, and you look for value adjustment, and in there you can adjust the brightness. So dark parts will remain dark, but the bright parts will scale up to even more brightness, and you can see here I'm kind of pushing it. The contrast you could also adjust. You could also increase the gamma or decrease the gamma, so you get even more of that bright saturation. Let's go there. This might be a little bit overdone. Yeah, this is definitely overdone. But we'll probably do one more of those ghosting, so it might reduce that again. And so this is just an idea of some of the different ways you can work with that to gradually get to this look like we are going warp speed through space, and we have the stars like little dots flying and turning into lines. It could also be used for rainfall. You're looking up in the sky and you got these raindrops turning into rain. I don't know what you call them. They're not stars or dots anymore. They are now lines. So here we go. Let's go and play that and make it the full size. So now you see that it's doing quite a different type of animation from what it was initially. So how do we turn this loopable now, right? This was another thing that I touched upon, is how to make this into a looping animation. Simply right click, or again under the menu here, you can see the same thing for frames, same menu here. So right click on that and select make loopable, right? And always keep in mind that some of these frames at the end will be sacrificed, so to speak, but they will essentially be blended away and rolled over to the beginning sequence of the same duration. The overall image, the animation, will be shorter by this much. I mean, by that part that you cut off at the end. If you want it perfectly continuous, you could go into the middle. It's not always needed and not always desired either. If you have a long animation, let's say 15 seconds, you may want to dedicate only the last 3 seconds of that for the blend over at the end to the beginning, so that you have this nice transition without seeing a sudden cut. But if you need more, then reduce it even more, and there you go. So now at this point I have a shorter animation, but it's not going to show too much of a jump. It seems like it's continuously looping. It still could be better, and that's because I didn't go all the way to the middle of the animation. Right, so now, well, let's do that. Let's go say, if I had only half of that, right, let's go right click one more time and say make loopable, and say let's go to the middle. We have a total of 73 frames. The last one is 72, and we can go to about half of that. That's 36-ish, 37. There you go. So now we have something that's going to look like it's just constantly bursting out in additional shooting stars here. And of course, if we needed that to slow down, you could go back to, not this one here, but to the the motion prediction module, for instance, right? Under the animated, you could go to the motion prediction module, or if you're in a hurry and you don't need it the very best quality, what you could do is do the time stretch and say, okay, I need it 55 frames, and apply that. And then you do that again, and you say time stretch, and this time we'll go to 88, bring it up a little bit more, and then you'll do that again, and one last time, and perhaps say we need 123. So we're back to a fairly high number of frames, like where we started, and well, not too bad. We expect things to blend in, to blend out, to continuously recycle, and it's a looping animation. Alright, so that's it for this quick intro on some of the new features or enhanced features with the starry sky, and we'll be seeing you for more, hopefully in a few days, on additional tutorials coming up with Project Dogwaffle Howler edition for the animation and video support, version 9, due sometimes in September 2013.